Now, in the Byzantine Church, we've lost an order within the church, and that is what is called the core bishop, which the Syriac Church still has. What's a core bishop? He was the bishop not of the city, but of the countryside. Now, we don't have him anymore because we just simply, the bishop of the city became the bishop of the countryside. But that wasn't originally how it was. The small villages had a core bishop. And the core bishop could do certain things, such as ordinations to certain offices, but was dependent upon the bishop in the larger city. And the bishop in the larger city was then dependent upon the metropolitan, who was usually the bishop of the provincial capital. Okay? And then bigger sees developed in greater importance because they were bigger cities. So what did we have? Well, traditionally the 5 patriarchates eventually came about. Rome, because it was the biggest city when it started, and was the capital of the empire. Constantinople, a Johnny-come-lately, but when it became the new capital, it went from being a fishing village with a core bishop to being a city of 1 million people with its own bishop and then patriarch. Antioch, which is the first see of St. Peter, that Rome oftentimes forgets. So when the people talk about, well, he's the successor of St. Peter, well, so is Patriarch Gregory III Laham, now Greek Catholic bishop, a patriarch of Antioch, of all the east of Alexandria, Jerusalem. So are the other patriarchs of Antioch. Okay. They are all successors of St. Peter. Then there is Alexandria, because it's the 3rd largest city in the empire. It was the 2nd largest city until Constantinople got so big. And there was always a rivalry between those two churches. That is an interesting story. It involved a whole lot of personalities of people you know all about. That makes you wonder, what's going on in heaven? To put it briefly, I'll give you one example. St. Cyril of Alexandria, great father of the church, saint on our calendar, and everything. When he was asked to add John Chrysostom to the diptychs, the list of the departed of the Church of Alexandria, he says, I will add him to the diptychs of the Church of Alexandria right next to Judas Iscariot. Okay, that's what he said. Because he had helped, his uncle had helped depose John Chrysostom. Okay, so it's a human as well as divine creation. So now, elsewhere in the early church, and I can go on for hours.
I'll mention number 5.
Number 5 is Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is also a Johnny-come-lately. It is not the patriarchal see because Jerusalem was a great city. It wasn't. Jerusalem had actually ceased to exist. It became Neo-Capitolina after the second Jewish revolt in the middle of the 2nd century. Rome demolished it completely, not just the temple, but everything, and started all over again without the Jews. And without the Jewish Christians as well, by the way. So the church in Capitolina was actually a Greek church that began to grow once again. And so that's the 5th one. But those are just, all of those patriarchates are simply bishops, given more authority and more influence because of the size or the historical importance of their city. Nothing else. Okay? They're still bishops. And so the bishop, presbyter, deacon, and people are still a part of those churches. So now it's hopefully the basic unit of the church is the community of faithful with their bishop, presbyters, and deacons. And so that's why in the early church they would say the Catholic Church of such and such a city. And they would oftentimes, certainly after the time of the New Testament, they would say the Catholic Church is such and such a city. Because there were non-Catholic churches in many of those cities as well. Because if you think heresy is a recent thing, no. There were heresies from the very onset. The Gnostic heresy being the first and most popular one to start. What's the Gnostic heresy? Gnosticism covered a whole variety of different heresies, but the basic understanding of Gnosticism is that the body is evil. Matter is evil. And therefore, our souls are imprisoned in this evil matter. So the Gnostics didn't believe in the Eucharist, and they didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and they didn't believe that Jesus really became a human being. He just appeared to be a human being, he just appeared to die. And so a lot of what we believe and what we teach that comes even from the Nicene Creed and earlier creeds is counter the Gnostic heresy, which by the way was very popular. Very popular.
It still is.
And still is. Much of what is the New Age movement, or what passes for spirituality here in our society, is simple Gnosticism. And therefore an old heresy. And not part of the church. You know, so, as I like to tell people, you know, they say, well, those secret gospels, these Gnostic gospels that were big secrets and everything like that. They weren't secrets. Number one, I had to read them in the seminary, so if they were such a big secret, why? And number two, the fathers wrote about them to write against them, because they were a problem even in the end of the first century. In the Gospel of John, we can see that. Notice, how does the Gospel of John start? With the prologue, and it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Yes, that would drive the Gnostics nuts, and that's why it's not in the Gnostic Bible. And it's also one of the reasons why a lot of Gnostic stuff isn't in our Bible. So that people say, well, there's all these ancient Gospels. I said, I know that. I know that. Well, why aren't they in the New Testament? Because they're heresy. The church didn't accept them because they were heresy. And then they get into this big thing about, oh, that's orthodoxy as it was founded. Well, that's again a Western mindset that ties individualism and makes individualism the ultimate God. And therefore forgets the real God. Now listen to this, another thing St. Ignatius of Antioch wrote when he gave his early examples of this from the reality of the community of the church. He said, I exhort you to study and to do all things with a divine harmony, while your bishop presides in the place of God, and your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles, along with your deacons. And as therefore the Lord did nothing without the Father, being united with him, neither should you do anything without the bishop and the presbyters. We don't go off on our own. That doesn't mean that everything's dependent upon the bishops and presbyters doing it, but everything has to be done in union with them. And then again, the presbyters can't do anything without the bishop. There's one church that St. Paul set up without a bishop. And it was the biggest mistake he made. And he knew it. All you have to do is read 1st or 2nd Corinthians to understand that and realize that there are 2 other letters we don't have. And he wrote them. He had to write them twice in such a clear way because they were screwed up. And the reason is that he left them in the charge of a committee of presbyters, which was a big mistake. And it was a cause of overwhelming problems that didn't go away when Paul died. Because he didn't name a bishop to Corinth. And so when Bishop finally was named to Corinth, they didn't accept a bishop's being named to Corinth, and they kept causing trouble, so that St. Clement of Rome had to write them again in the 90s, and admonishing them in much the same way as Paul did, 40 years earlier. God so loved the world that he didn't send a committee. And that's a committee of presbyters, or people, or bishops for that matter. But that doesn't mean, by the way, that it is a top-down thing. There is community involved, but not a committee organization. So the ecclesiology of our Byzantine churches, our understanding of church in Byzantine Christianity, finds its expression fully in one ecclesiastical act. And what would that be? Any guesses? What's the one ecclesiastical act that displays the Byzantine Church's understanding of itself? And it's very biblical, by the way. It's a celebration of the hierarchical divine liturgy of the bishop with his clergy and his people. Now, because we have pews in our churches are temples, and therefore make them almost completely unfit for divine worship. That's my bugaboo.
That's true.
It is. We lose this sense. Okay? Because when we put pews in, we put them in so many times like they were put in Protestant churches. And Protestant churches are the ones who introduced permanent seating in churches. Okay? The reason why? So Protestant church was no longer centered upon the Eucharist. It was centered upon the university professor teaching. You ever wondered why the principal founders of many of the original Protestant denominations were lawyers who loved to hear themselves talk, and priests who were university professors? Luther, Calvin was a lawyer. Zwingli was a priest who was a university professor. Knox was a priest who was a university professor. The founders of the Hungarian Reformed Church, which has a direct relationship upon our church, were university professors and priests who were university professors. And so one of the first things that they did when they reformed the church is they took out the altar, replaced it with an occasional table, and they set it up like their classrooms or their courtrooms. Do you ever wonder why a courtroom looks like a Protestant church? Because they're the same thing. Or many Protestant churches look like my classroom at John Carroll University when I was teaching there. At least if it was built in the 16th century, because they didn't have individual desks, they had benches. Well, because those were the people who were in charge. So our ecclesiology is celebrated and vividly and visually shown in the celebration of the hierarchical divine liturgy. Now, what happens in the hierarchical divine liturgy? When we see the whole hierarchical divine liturgy celebrated by the bishop and his clergy and his people together, how does the bishop come into the church?
Procession.
Preceded, met at the door, greeted, and incensed, brought forward.
And comes in dressed as a monk. And where does he put his clothes on? Amongst the people. And this is actually how the early liturgy of the church was celebrated. He came in simple attire that eventually became monastic attire. And he was vested in the midst of the people.